How are we, how are you, to survive in this world without forgetting who you're called to be, how you're called to be, the life you're called to live? You know the story of the Exodus from Egypt. You know the story of Moses who fled Egypt and was tending his flocks and making a nice life for himself as a shepherd. This is post-Egypt, pre-burning bush. New town, new family, new son, new life, new job. The status quo in Egypt had gone right back the same as it ever was, unchanged. Masters and slaves and great ignorant masses of citizens asleep to injustice. And that could have been, should have been, the end of the story. Moses was done. He was out. That's when the story would end. He lived happily ever after. And then, even when he saw the burning bush, he could have kept on walking. You've spent time in this city. You have walked past stranger things than a burning bush and kept on going. He had a busy day, he had a busy life, he had a wife, a little kid. He should have kept his head down and kept on going, but he didn't. As the story goes, maybe just as a narrative device, when he saw the bush, he sees this thing on fire out of the corner of his eye, and he speaks, he says to himself, out loud, to himself and his sheep, "Now let me turn aside. Now let me turn aside that I might see this great sight. Let me turn aside. Let me turn aside. Let me pause from the routine and the rut of my ordinary days to turn aside, to notice something." In the early Jewish commentaries on the story, one rabbi says it is this turning aside, this twisting of a stiff neck, this willingness to encounter something unknown, this turning toward a new possibility, that in itself is the reason why the Holy spoke to Moses in that place, because he lifted his eyes, because he turned his head, because he was willing to be changed, to step out of what he knew and expected and into something different. Only when he turned his head in this story did God speak to him. Only when he turned his head did God remember to Moses that the shepherd was of one family with a people enslaved, and that his people called out for a great turning, which was his to participate in, not to be set apart from. The words of the story in Exodus aren't a dictation from a divine author. They aren't a haphazard retelling. These Jewish scriptures are the products of centuries of authoring and editing and debate and decision. So if there is a line in there, even if it's a baffling one, even if it's a strange one, even if it's something that doesn't seem like it needs to be there, it's there on purpose. Now let me turn aside. Now let me turn aside that I may see this great sight. It's not there just to be a description of what Moses did. It's there to be a reminder of what is possible for any of us. A reminder that on any ordinary day in an ordinary life filled with all the ordinary things, nonetheless we can turn, nonetheless something different is possible. It says that change doesn't just happen to us. We aren't actors or puppets or pawns. Change happens inside of us too. And while all this may be one single line in a 3,000-year-old story, it reminds us there is no escape from Egypt without a turning aside inside of ourselves. The world is not frozen, not given, not stuck on rails, and change for a nation of people starts when we as people, when we the people, choose to turn towards something new, to turn back towards something old in new light. We can lift our gaze not to what stands between us, but to what stands before us. There are little things that catch in the ear for each of us. The musician hears the off-key note. The teacher sees in the student's eyes that quickest flash of a look of not comprehending. The cook tastes the absence of salt, tastes the squeeze of lemon that wasn't added but should have been. And in the reporting on the inauguration, I heard this, which stuck in my preacher's ear. This from the podcast, The Daily. First, we'll hear the new president speak, and then the reporters commenting on it.
Our history has been a constant struggle between the American ideal, that we're all are created equal, and the harsh, ugly reality that racism, nativism, fear, demonization have long torn us apart.
There's a real sense in this speech that he can kind of will it into being somehow. It feels like this was not so much an inauguration speech as a kind of sermon, right? A sermon to an angry and divided country. There's not a single reference to a policy in this speech, right? It's not about an agenda. It is a kind of wartime message to a profoundly polarized America.
I thought that also. I got flashbacks to my father, who's a pastor, and can sometimes copy and paste some of the portions of this speech. I mean,
friends, what I hear in that laugh, though I understand it, what I hear in that laugh is despair. Despair for the possibility of change. Despair for the whole notion that our democracy is a reflection of our hearts and not merely our policies. Despair that someday a change is going to come. Despair that the choices we make don't matter. We are ground to dust, each of us under the system, and that's all that matters. Despair that our nature even has better angels in it. My ears are 4 years unused to a president proclaiming hope over despair, change over stagnation, progress over status quo, but I know what hope sounds like. My ears are 4 years unused to hearing a poet call from the Capitol that we might merge mercy with might and make love our legacy and change our children's birthright. But I know what hope sounds like. Turn your head aside. Another world is possible. And we are not broken, but unfinished. Since Roosevelt, at least presidents have made a plan for their first 100 days, a policy plan, a program plan, an executive order plan. You've watched this maybe start to unfold these first few days of the new administration, one thing after another. Since Roosevelt, at least presidents have made a plan for their first 100 days. And if this was a different year, you might hear me invite you to do the same right now in another moment in time. I might charge you to make that sort of a plan. I might say, how will you speak up and show up differently in these next 100 days? How will you live your life differently? What's your list of priorities? What's your to-do list? What's your plan for your first 100 days? Maybe we'll do that next January. But today, I remember it is easier to make a to-do list than to turn toward hope. It's easier to set goals than actually to believe another world is possible. Our to-do list for these first 100 days starts by turning our heads, breaking out of our ruts, taking a breath, and listening to hope. We gather in this community to do the simple and holy and difficult work of becoming people. We gather in this community so that we do not forget who we are called into becoming. We gather so that through the storm, through the night, we have hands to lead us home, to offer, as the poet says, hope and laughter to ourselves. So while once we asked, how could we possibly prevail over catastrophe? Now we assert, how could catastrophe possibly prevail over us? That's the ground and the grounding. That's the hope that comes before the to-do list. That's the blank page spread out before us, that whatever we fill it with, the surface we write on is a surface that can imagine a new day and send us boldly towards it together. Amen.